Recording in progress.
Okay, fantastic. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the January Pedestrian and Transit Advisory Committee meeting. I am going to get started. Do we have an acting secretary for the night?
Yes, we do. This is Steve. That's me.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Do you have everything you need, the meetings template and everything?
Yes, I do. All set up.
Fantastic. Okay, let us start with roll call of our PTAC members. Ted Alexander.
I'm here.
Ginny Alverson. Don't see Ginny. Caroline Vodager. Do not see. Meredith Brown.
Here.
Laura Evans. Laura. Christopher Ferry.
Here.
Tim Gilman. Oh, Tim is leaving PTAC. He just had too many conflicts, couldn't make the timing work. So he emailed me and gave me his blessing to tell you all tonight. So we're very grateful for his contributions to the committee. Yes, okay, so we can skip him. Preston Gutelius.
Here.
Satoko Hirai.
Here.
Brenda Marvin. Here. Steve Mulder.
Here.
Barbara Myers.
Here.
Bianca Norkunis.
Yeah.
Vitor Pamplona.
Here.
Zach Rosenberg. We don't see Zach. Alessandra Sider, myself, I'm here. Rob Stanzel.
Here.
Carol Vulgaris, I also do not see. And our ex officio, Kate and Justin are not here, but Lily and Brad are here from Mobility. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And then our esteemed city councilor, Willem Baugh, is not with us tonight. Our guests, I would love for them to introduce themselves. We have one in person. And then for those of you online, when I call your name, you'll see a little button pop up on your screen that says unmute, and please just unmute yourself and say your name and your ward and a little bit about why you're here tonight. But we'll start with our in-person guest.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mackenzie Webb. I actually just moved to Somerville January 1st, so I honestly don't even know what ward I'm in. I'll have to find
Very
out.
active.
But I was telling Alessandra earlier that I just moved back from living in the UK for a couple years and didn't have a car, sold my car before I moved. So came back and got interested in kind of like the, car-free living and that whole thing. So I decided to get involved and see what's out there. So yeah.
Yes, welcome. Thank you for being here. Okay, our online participants, we will start with Joel.
Hey, Joel, I live in Ward 4, I think, Winter Hill, and I like listening to these things, interesting stuff. Specifically, I'm involved in the Davis Square Neighborhood Council, so that Elm Street parking pilot is very interesting. So, yeah.
Awesome. Nice to see you, Joel. Oh, and I see Ginny just hopped on. That's great. And then finally, Allison, you should be able to speak now. Or maybe not, because it's your iPhone. That might be a little hard for you. We will note that you are here and you are welcome to contribute if you like. Okay, great. Thank you all. Are there any objections to our December minutes or changes? Okay, then I motion to approve them. Do I have a second?
This is Vitor, a second.
Great. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Okay, great. I have two quick announcements. Well, one is an announcement. One is a something I want everybody's input on, logistical. So one, PTAC is 5 years old this month, which is very exciting. We started in January 2020, and we've been through the whole pandemic, and much more. So thank you all. And some members have been here the entire time. So thank you all for your service, no matter how long you've been serving. Okay, logistical thing. So we, we had a little meeting space snafu tonight, and after April, maybe sooner, depending on what happens after tonight, we need to be in a different meeting location than the library. And we have two options. One is the conference room in the Somerville office. So this is over in kind of a municipal building on Cross Street. So it's very close to the Somerville community, or I'm sorry, the East Somerville Community School. It can hold about 15 people. An OWL is available for hybrid meetings. The only thing is that we would need to move our meeting up in the evening to 5:45. So go from 5:45 to 7:15, just because the building closes at 7:30 and they need like a buffer to close it up, which I know is not conducive to, it might not be conducive to folks' schedules. So the second option is to use the community room at Boynton Yards. So it's on 101 South Street, if that means anything to people. It's very close to Portico Brewing. And it's like a 10-minute walk from the Union Square Green Line station. It can hold plenty of people, I'm told. It has video conferencing set up. It's not an OWL, but it's a similar kind of deal. And we can keep our meetings at the same time if we wanted to. Plus, you could get beer afterwards very easily if you are into that. Do folks have a preference? Which is the one that folks would like better?
I could make either of those options work, so either one works for me.
Okay.
Yeah,
great.
go for it. Here's one.
Alessandra, I'd also love to make sure that committee members know that we don't have to have a forever solution right now. I think tonight is giving us evidence that the city is not in a great position in terms of number of public meetings we want to handle on a given night in relation to the number of spaces we can offer that meet our accessibility needs, that meet our technology needs, and are located in convenient places. So if it's okay with you all, let's trial something. Let's know that we might ask you all to iterate again, and you can give us feedback if those temporary solutions are not working well for you all or for our guests.
Thank you, Brad. Yes, good note.
My commute makes 5:45 really difficult, but if the majority needs to, obviously rule here.
We will still have an online option, correct?
Yes, we will still have an online
Okay.
option. Absolutely.
Because really, for me right now, trying to get around is a little tricky and frustrating.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. That was a top priority of ours for finding an in-person location, was one that could handle video conferencing as well.
I just wanted to add, I probably have a slight preference for retaining the same time slot, just because my work does often run a little late. But again, if it's doable, by the way.
I would say for me, it's a similar boat where I could do both of these, but the same time is easier than shifting earlier.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask this. Would anybody prefer the conference room at Somerville on Cross Street at 5:45? Because I'm hearing mostly a leaning towards the community space, but keeping our same meeting time.
Hi, this is Meredith. I actually would say I do have a slight preference for 5:45. I think that works a little bit, honestly, better for my commute and for bedtime schedules, but I'm very happy to continue with 6:15 if that's best for the majority.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's still a slight majority, it sounds like, for the Boynton Yards community room. So are folks okay with trying that out for maybe a month or two, and then if things are not working, or if we just want to try the other space, give it a test, then we can do that as well? Does that sound like an okay plan for folks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you all. I will let Justin and Kate know about that tomorrow. I promised I would follow up with them.
Thank you for your flexibility, everybody. And I'm sorry that the city's resources are not exactly matching up what we want to be able to provide for our volunteer committees. We are working on this. Better days are ahead, but it's definitely a tough moment right now.
Thanks, Brad. All right, moving into subcommittee updates. design review meet?
No.
And special projects is on hold. So community events, we met last Wednesday, January 8th. It was myself, Ted, Barbara, and Preston. I'm not forgetting anybody, right? That was all of us. Okay, great. We debriefed from the tabling at the Winter Farmers Market, which was a lot of fun. But we did have a rather extended conversation with a member of the community who was not happy with changes that were being made to the street, particularly in the Spring Hill area. Preston and I, I think we had a good, productive conversation with this community member. But we started thinking about like ways to provide more opportunities to engage directly with folks who have disagreements with like the way that we tend to approach things on the committee, and kind of the philosophy of Vision Zero and related activities. Because sometimes we'll have, as everybody knows, we'll have folks come to our meeting and they are not pleased with the projects that we're talking about and the approach that's being taken. And to us in the conversation, it kind of felt like we want to have more of a conversation with those people who come to our meetings, but like the agenda just doesn't allow us to do that. So we were thinking about, maybe instituting more of a normalization of like offering up like a coffee visit, for example, like teaming up with 2 members of the committee and like going out to coffee with this person, offering that. Or experimenting with having like office hours of some sort for PTAC, where community members can just like come into a public space and talk to people who are at least close to mobility happenings in the community. So that was one thing that we were starting to explore. We also did a little bit more planning for our walk audit of Union Square that's going to come up in April, hopefully. And Preston found a really cool like prompt sheet from Walk Massachusetts that like you can hand out to members of the walk audit and they can kind of reflect on certain elements of the area. So I think we can kind of adapt that for our purposes, which I'm excited about. And then we also started just kind of listing out different tabling and walk opportunities for 2025. We're going to wait until the Somerville Arts Council has their official calendar sent out before we start making any concrete plans. But we just wanted to start thinking about like where our energy was going to be prioritized this year. Did I miss anything, Barbara, Preston, or Ted?
No, that was complete and succinct.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
I have a quick question. Do we have like an email address where people can send comments to if they want? We do. Okay.
We do. It
Yeah.
is somervilleptach@gmail.com.
Okay. Do we get much?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
I get random emails that sometimes are quite long about like, well, here's something you might consider with like parking, or here's a different proposal here. But we could start promoting that more.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Would it disrupt the meeting too much to say a sentence or two about the extremely unhappy resident?
Oh, no.
Or with their complaint?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I don't, full caveat that I'm not that person, and I do agree with the things that are happening. So like it is filtered through that perspective. But it sounded like the things that they were unhappy with were they felt like there was a lack of mobility in Spring Hill generally, especially with the shift of the 85 bus, which used to go down Summer Street. There was a concern about the safety benefits of Central Street specifically, with the bike lane, the protected bike lanes on both sides, and kind of it sounded like the in progress like construction dynamics happening there. They also noted that they were concerned that the changes would prompt more road rage from drivers, which I think is a comment that was echoed at our meeting last month. And they also raised concern that they were seeing the changes that were being made as kind of prioritizing younger people and not keeping kind of people who were older in mind. Is that a fair assessment, Preston?
Yeah, the only other thing I remember her remarking on specifically was concerns about like some of the Summer Street bump out changes. And like a fire engine or something getting stuck and some things along that line. But yes, I agree.
Yes, and I believe Lily clarified that the fire truck was caught in some mud from the plantings. Is that right?
I don't remember the exact details of how it got that way, but I think, yes, the end result was they were stuck in some mud in one of the planter beds. We talked about this a little bit in our staff meeting, but I'm not sure if there was updated info on whether there was a particular turning movement that they were making. But yes, that is a thing that did happen.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, awesome. So let's dive into our first kind of meaty agenda item, which is going to be a city update, which we have not had in a while. So thank you guys for prepping this. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, including the parking and curb use study, parking minimums, Elm Street parking pilot, a lot of parking stuff. And also an update on participatory budgeting improvements, bus improvements. So take it away, Lily and Brad.
Yeah, thanks, Alessandra. Thanks, group. And please forgive us, both Lily and I are pinch hitting for your regular staff liaisons, the amazing Justin and the amazing Kate, who couldn't be here tonight. Justin's covering a different meeting that he was really needed to be at. So there will be a couple of these 4 city updates where Justin and Kate serve as the primary project managers. And so if there are questions that we cannot answer, we'll take note of them and make sure that we follow up. But I believe that the framing that we had suggested to the officers as we set this agenda was for a couple of them to provide previews and then set up for longer form discussions in future meetings. This is most prominent with the first item, which is the parking and curb use study. Suzanne Rinfrit, our director of parking, and Jackie Stagnari, our senior project manager, will attend one of your future meetings to dig a little bit deeper. They've been the city's lead with partnership and support from mobility. So Lily, do you have the ability, or Alessandra, to share slides? We've got those
I can share the slides. I actually don't have them. This team to let me know where on the.
in your email. Thank you. And Alessandra, please, give us the time prompts to make sure that if the group wants to spend more time or less time on one, that we can get through all 4.
Sounds good. I have us scheduled for this agenda item until 7:20.
Okay, thanks.
But we could probably take a little more time if needed.
I'm going to share this into a webinar, so bear with me 1 second.
All good.
Okay. Hopefully everybody should be able to see this.
Looks good online.
Would you please describe these slides? That would be greatly appreciated.
Yes, Jenny, we will do
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
So I'll go ahead to the next slide.
Sure. So agenda slide, again, 4-part strategy here. Citywide parking and curb use, brief background and update preview. Second item, the new parking minimums zoning work that the city council and the city's planning board have been doing with staff support from mobility and other departments. Third item, Elm Street parking pilot, which will rehash some of the updates that PTAC received back in the summertime, right? And fourth one is an update on the prior year's participatory budgeting funded bus stop improvements, which we're really excited to update you all on. So let's go to our first slide, please, Lily. That'll be citywide parking and curb use for background. So we decided to put a lot of text on the screen here so that folks who are not able to make the meeting or want to digest at their leisure will have longer form explanations. Many of you will remember that back in 2020, 2021, city staff, city council, many of our boards and commissions had requested that we bring in a technical study to look at the real estate that the city owns and operates on our public streets and rights of way. Progressive cities around the world are recognizing that curb space is a critical asset for safety, for access, for equity, for sustainability and economic vitality. And too few cities historically have treated curb as an actual asset to be leveraged and utilized to advance community goals. So the city council funded the mayor's request, and we had the ability to bring on a specialty consulting firm to support our interdepartmental staff, begin with a series of real deep dives into existing conditions data, and stand up a community-based task force to serve as a sounding board, working with staff from several departments to understand trends and start to establish a vision for future policy decisions. I want to be very, very clear that this effort was a study, not a plan. It is identifying directions for the city to move over time, recognizing that we're all gaining new information, bringing new community members into our processes. So please do not view it as the be-all, end-all of city curb use policy. So our goals included to be as effective and equitable as possible on the curb, to advance our commitments around climate, which is reducing drive-alone mode share, and advancing the rapid decarbonization of our transportation system. And these goals are listed on the slide. To ensure accessibility for all. We know that we have too many sidewalks and curbs that are inaccessible for all community members. To improve transparency and data-driven decision-making, to really start to identify opportunities for quick stop passenger and freight loading to make sure that easy, convenient, and safe access to the curb is provided for critical users, often in the commercial and in the human services realm. To, of course, expand our bicycle network, improving access and safety for all users. Of course, to improve transit performance, making sure that buses can get to the curb safely and cannot lose run time as they try to merge back into mixed traffic, for example. So I think that's a good summary of the first slide. And Ginny, there's an image on here, which is one of the maps that was included in the existing conditions data. Next slide, please, Lily. So the second slide on the citywide parking and curb use data inventory shows that city staff and our consultant team did a bunch of block walking and actually collected two important pieces of information to help us understand how we're using our curb. First was a really detailed inventory of the existing regulations. It's incredible that even in a small city like Somerville, 4 square miles of land, 100 linear miles of road, we, until this study, did not have a comprehensive GIS database of all of our signage and all of our curb regulations. So this was a really great step for us to have that existing conditions data mapped and analyzed. This image on this slide shows a representative series of the second type of data. So in addition to mapping the existing conditions on signage, we also mapped utilization of the curb in a series of representative areas that covered about 20% of the city's curb miles. We weren't able to go citywide. Wasn't time and budget to do that. And so the image on the screen shows a handful of our representative neighborhoods in the Union Square, Prospect Hill, Spring Hill, and Winter Hill neighborhoods. And of course, you expect to see that same percentage of land area covered in other neighborhoods that aren't on this map, like East Somerville, like Davis Square, like Ball Square, Teal Square, etc. So all of this existing conditions data was shared with our task force, published online, and there's a robust project website that is still up on our Summer Voice page. So anybody who wants to dig deeper can find on the links linked here. Let's keep moving, please, Lily. Thank you. Next slide. So we thought it might be helpful for the committee and for our guests to just get a quick summary of some of the recommendations that the study made for the city going forward. These are not exhaustive, just a half a dozen representative ones. The first one was actually about internal city operations, really improving clarity for internal.
All good.
Making sure that we could clarify for ourselves, for our community members and residents, what are the various roles and responsibilities of different parts of city government. For example, the parking department versus the engineering division versus the mobility division and others. One of the recommendations was to increase staff capacity for the city's parking department. And so this slide shows that there's an update, which is we were successful in getting additional staff resources created. And we've got now a larger team in Suzanne's department, and that's really adding capacity for us. Second recommendation that I'll quickly describe was to establish a clear prioritization for how the city makes decisions about prioritizing curb space. And all of these priorities were vetted through a task force, shared publicly. There were surveys, and those things are all captured, as you would expect. Green infrastructure, accessibility, transit access were higher priorities than long-term storage of private vehicles. Third recommendation that's on the screen here is to ensure adequate access for commercial and passenger loading activities in key districts, really setting goals to work with local business communities and make sure that commercial loading, metered parking, quick stop access for the curb, for e-commerce and for the pickup and food delivery economy was safe and predictable for all users. The fourth one that I'll call attention to, and then we'll move on because then we're going to talk too long on this particular item if I'm not careful, is to invest not only in the human resources side of our city agencies that I mentioned at the top, but also to invest in new technologies. Many cities around the globe, around the country, and around the region are increasingly automating many functions, whether that is a better interface for residents and the business community to seek and renew permits, or whether it's for enforcement activities for staff to catalog and manage and analyze citation data, for folks who are working or contesting with tickets to interact online and have predictability. And one example that we've actually highlighted on the screen is something that you've heard us talk about, which is automated enforcement, trying to take some of the human judgment out of these equations and make sure that we've got technology on the street that can keep people safe 24/7, not just when a parking control officer is on shift or on a specific block. So great progress on the safety stick, as you've heard us describe in recent meetings. So I hope that's a helpful summary of this study recommendations and just quick recommended representative updates. And remember, Suzanne and Jackie, the subject experts, will be here with you all when you're ready at February, March, or April meeting. Next slide, please, Lily. Okay, so yeah, Alessandra, would you like me to pause on that kind of subtopic? Would you like to pause for a moment?
Yeah, let's see if anybody has questions on the parking study. And if not, we can move on. Okay, I think we are good.
Brilliant. Thank you. I appreciate it. So second update is something that I'm sure folks have read about in the newspapers. It has been an active effort from the city council, from the city's planning board and various city departments, and that is to continue Somerville's zoning reform efforts. When I started here in 2007, we were working with a zoning ordinance that was so antique that parts of it dated back to the 90s, parts of it dated back to the 50s, and parts of it even dated back to the 20s. It's incredible to think of how far we've come in the time since. Our zoning reform reached a real milestone, as many of you know, in 2019. So the slide on the screen gives some background on parking requirements and zoning. It should probably be a little clearer here. Remember, the zoning ordinances in North America have often prescribed and even mandated auto mobility. They have prioritized and codified auto dependence into many of our land use rules, regardless of whether residents, communities, or the private sector are looking for those rules and those requirements. And so best practices have emerged over the last 20 or 30 years around North America, and many communities have said, do we really need to mandate that the private sector provide this type of resource when reinvestment is made in real estate development? Should we, in fact, actually listen to the market and allow it to provide some parking when necessary, but not make that decision for the market or for the adjacent communities who often suffer from excess traffic, excess congestion, safety hazards when too much parking is provided, which of course generates too much traffic. So Somerville began this journey. We culminated in a 2019 reform effort that included elimination of many parking minimum requirements around transit stations. Now, this effort really focused on the new Green Line and trying to get ahead of these questions, saying, We expect to be densifying and growing our apartment building capacity, and providing new homes for people around rapid transit. If the real estate development market is providing one parking space per apartment, we are going to create an artificial cap on the number of homes that we can provide in smart growth neighborhoods. So wouldn't it make some sense to eliminate this minimum requirement? And I want to be very clear, these reforms did not prohibit provision of new parking. It simply eliminated the formula-based provision of new parking. There is an important nuance there. So this 2019 reform is about 30% of the city, but our city council, our activist community, and our mayors, both past and present, asked us to continue to evaluate data and maybe even go a step further. So in early 2024, this is written on the slide, the Somerville City Council passed a unanimous resolution directing the mayor and staff to work on a package of additional zoning reforms that would continue this progress citywide. And so that's been part of the city's task over the last 6 months or so. Lily, let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And you said 7:15 is our cutoff, right?
7:20.
7:20. Thanks, Alessandra. So the next slide is also on parking requirements and an overview. We have a planning and preservation and zoning division that served as a project manager, serves as the formal staff to our planning board and our zoning board. They've worked with mobility and many other city departments to ultimately prepare and introduce a zoning amendment in the fall. City Council and the city's planning board adopted that ordinance in December. It is scheduled to take effect in February. Summary of the changes include removing of all parking minimums, establishment of maximum ratios in all zoning districts. And again, this is on the slide. It simplified the very arcane and detailed zoning language and tables, which often are very unfriendly to users. Transparency in government is really part of the Somerville DNA. The zoning is one of the hardest things to make accessible to the average person. And so the staff who worked on this reform package really simplified all of these tables and all the language. We reformatted for readability, clarified the definition of various types of uses. We ensured that something that we had been doing case by case on a policy level for projects that deliver a permanently affordable housing under our inclusionary zoning ordinance. Remember that 1 out of 5 apartments are required to be deed restricted for people with low and moderate incomes. We would work case by case to make sure that a prorated amount of parking in apartment buildings that provided parking were prioritized for residents of those affordable units. This ordinance codified that 20% element there and takes some of the guesswork out. So I think that's a good summary of the dense text on the slide. We might have one more on this topic, Lily. Let's see here. Yeah, I think it's really important also to acknowledge that the community as a whole was not unanimous in asking for or endorsing this. Transportation issues are hard, they are emotional, they are fraught with unintended consequences and legitimate equity concerns. And those have been raised by our staff internally, by our elected officials and our appointed officials, by average residents, activists, and community partners. So we think it's really important to continue to try to educate folks about what this ordinance does and does not do. It does not eliminate existing on-street parking. It does not prohibit the creation of new parking. It does not require all developments in the transit zones to be car-free. It ensures that there are exceptions to the policy and mechanisms for the development community to continue to build garages as they see fit. Here's what it does. Again, this is on the screen here with the myth-busting slide. It removes the requirements to build parking, establishes ceilings for the amount of parking provided. It lowers the maximum amount that can be built in transit areas. And it includes a mechanism, again, through special permit to request more parking than the established maximums. So we feel that there's good customer service here, good transparency. And I want to close this topic, Alessandro, by reminding all of us that hundreds of communities around North America have implemented these types of zoning reform. Somerville prides itself on being on the cutting edge, but this is an area where, yes, we're progressive, but we're also following in the footsteps of many cities, many towns, different sizes, different climates, and even different decades. There's a well-established playbook that recommends these types of regulatory approaches to make sure we can get good human-centered development and not be overburdened by the negative impacts of North American auto dependency. Why don't I pause?
Quick question, Brad. I mean, I'm very excited about this. But I'm curious, so you said that you submitted a zoning amendment that will go into effect on February 1st, but then also the city council passed a resolution. So is there a relationship between those two things? Like, did one need approval for the, or what? I'm just curious.
Thanks for the clarifying question, Alessandra. So the most recent zoning changes were instigated by a resolution in the city council in the February, March 2024 timeline. That was the bullet on the slide that I was alluding to a moment ago. And so that's the kind of thing where the mayor's administration and staff are able to say, okay, thank you, council. We see that this is an issue important to you and to your constituents, and we will assign staff to work on it. So that kicked off that 6-month technical preparation.
Okay.
That culminated in a draft ordinance that was submitted for the council and the planning board's consideration in the late fall.
And then they just approved it.
They just approved it in December of 2024.
Okay.
It is scheduled to take effect February 1st, 2025.
Okay, thank you. Super helpful.
Thanks for asking for the clarifying question.
Christopher, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but a little bit of do you know any of the history of the zoning and the parking minimum? Was that, do we know when the city started putting in parking minimums? Because there are certainly a lot of structures around the city that don't have them, including the building I'm in. And then the side thing is, how often were exemptions to those minimums given? I just think of that as a perspective of people saying, oh, well, it's always been this way. And a little bit of, well, no, actually it hasn't. And the city, parts of the city worked quite well with different mass transit and an earlier age. I don't know if anybody's, if anybody's aware of that history or.
Christopher, this is Brad. I think that our planning and zoning staff could answer your question because they're a little bit more intimately familiar with Somerville's zoning history from like a legal and an administrative standpoint. And they could tell you, oh, that was part of the 1960 reform, for example. And I'm sure it seemed progressive at the time. It's only with the benefit of hindsight that we have identified all of the challenges that we created. I will note that, the planning books that I read and that I'm aware of suggest that cities around North America were simply copying and pasting one another's regulations from literally when the dawn of zoning in the mid-1920s all the way to the modern era. And so in all likelihood, the rules that were put on the books, whether it's, the 40s, 50s, or 60s, were not tailored to Somerville's unique urbanism. They were not tailored to our mass transit ecosystem. They were not based on any observed data about household ownership or use of automobiles. They were simply cut and paste from somebody who'd been a little further along in that journey. So it's unfortunate that so many communities have had that kind of dynamic, but are now unwinding it.
Was it common for developments to get exceptions to the parking rules, or relatively uncommon?
That is a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. However, I have seen many, many cases, even in the 17 years I've been here, of development proponents seeking special permits to avoid having to provide parking or having to provide as much parking. And I think folks would not be surprised to hear me say that those dynamics have often been used to reduce or prohibit new development in communities like Somerville. And when you look at the regional scale, I think some of that is part of the reason we are in a regional housing shortage.
Any other questions on parking minimums? All right.
So those are the two big ones. Thanks for everybody's forbearance. I hope this has been somewhat helpful. And again, sorry to be pinch hitting on Justin's behalf here as he's over at planning board right now. Next slide, please, Lonnie. This should be a little quicker. Oh, no. There's another Well, this slide, this final slide, I think, and I hope, describes many of the things I said already. Existing parking minimums are largely arbitrary and are an artifact of the 20th century, and they largely backfired. Rigid minimums do not allow for developers to have flexibility to customize parking based on specific context or needs or markets. 2/3 of Somerville's workers get to work without using a motor vehicle. 25% of our households have no vehicle at all. Remember that when we require every home to have a parking space, we inflate the cost of housing, even for people who have no need or desire to use a car. Parking is very expensive, often $50,000 per space of construction costs. Those costs are passed on to all of us, but most specifically residential and commercial tenants in buildings, regardless of whether they use those spaces. All right, let's roll. Next slide, please. I think my recommendation, Alessandra, would be that we move past this.
Yeah.
That is fine, approved.
All right. So quicker updates. You all have this next slide now is the third item, which is Davis Square, Elm Street, curb use. The city, like you all as residents, has identified a real problem with curb access in the heart of Davis Square. You remember the technical presentation that staff provided for you last summer. We collected a bunch of data. We did a bunch of block walking. We talked to a bunch of merchants and a bunch of people on the street, and we observed an astounding number of safety challenges, of parking violations in the heart of our best and most active retail and restaurant and nightlife district. And our sense was that these safety and access challenges were really eroding some of the vitality and the competitiveness of Davis Square. And so we felt as staff that it was important to start to develop alternatives and options to keep Elm Street safe, to support small business vitality, to make sure that merchants can get deliveries, that pick up and drop off food economy can safely operate without double parking, without blocking buses, that delivery trucks of all shapes and sizes can have predictable places to get to the curb and do their work without having their trailers spill over top of crosswalks and create unacceptable safety hazards. So you all provided a helpful comment letter on the city's proposal to repurpose some of our curb space away from parking meters and to quick stop loading zones that could be used for both commercial deliveries, passenger deliveries, and quick stop food pickup and delivery. At this time, we do not have any substantial update about this work. We want to note that that we talked to dozens of merchants. Some of them were very supportive of the direction that we wanted to go with the proposal, and some of them were very, very opposed. And I think that is legitimate, and it's acceptable to note that the small business community, like any community, is not a monolith, and different business models exist even on a 2-block stretch of Elm Street. So we are looking to continue this dialogue, to continue fact-finding and coalition building, to try to make the street safer for all users. Well, it's okay. Let's go to the second slide for Elm Street. This summarizes the small business outreach that I just described, feedback that we heard. Mobility staff and parking department are currently working on a work plan for calendar year 2025. At this time, we don't have a specific milestone for this effort about when we would choose to bring this to the city's traffic commission to seek any regulatory changes. But please rest assured, we will continue to do outreach, as controversial and as emotional as that can be at times, as we all know. So no major update, but this is again part of our 2025 work plan list. Okay, that's it for this slide. Thanks, everybody. I know it's 7:20, so this will just be hopefully 30 seconds of excitement.
All good.
And then I'm happy to take questions on those two together. So last slide, I think this is a one-slider, participatory budgeting. So many of you were probably involved in Somerville's first ever participatory budgeting effort last year. The slide describes that in June 2022, the mayor proposed and the city council endorsed an allocation of approximately $1 million on our operating budget, then giving the power directly to the people rather than simply through our elected officials, to say, let's generate ideas and let's crowdsource a bunch of priorities that we might not be able to fund through some of our traditional processes. And none of you will be surprised to know that transportation, safety, and access questions were really, really popular in terms of the public response There's an online map. There's a detailed report that you can find from participatory budgeting year one. Winning ideas that are ultimately put up to vote included enhanced bus stop amenities, specifically adding shelters at bus stops that do not have them today. This is a new area for the city of Somerville. In the modern era, we have not done a lot of city-sponsored bus shelters, except as large-scale capital projects. So we were really excited as staff to say, here's a funding mechanism to allow us to look at data, find high ridership stops, find sidewalks that are accessible and capable of having a 4-foot to 8-foot clear space around a weather shelter, and then go through a procurement process for a standard MBTA product and go out and get it installed. So the dollar value that was allocated by the steering committee of participatory budgeting was $200,000. The unit cost for these is typically about $40,000 each, believe it or not.
Wow.
So we were thinking that we'd be able to fund about 5 locations. And we view this as an investment in the future, a prototype that we want to scale over time. So Lily, last slide will show you the specifics. So 4 locations have been established based on usage, crash data, paths of travel, sidewalk width, accessibility, and MBTA plans. Those 4 are listed on the screen. Holland Street at Cameron Avenue, near the Council on Aging and the TAB building, which is now a bit of a city hall annex for many of our departments, really close to the small business community of Teal Square and the transit hub of Davis Square. There's also daycares in addition to the senior center there. Washington Street at Webster Avenue is the second one, really high usage stop in an important commercial area in the heart of Union Square. Washington Street at Beacon Street, another major transfer point where we have modern, wide, accessible sidewalks, but we actually don't have weather shelters for the Route 83 bus today. And lastly, Washington Street at Tufts Street, adjacent to the East Somerville Green Line stop. One common thread on all 4 of these sites is, will be no surprise to you all, many Somerville sidewalks are too narrow, even for basic accessibility today, let alone that 4 to 9 foot extra dimension we need to place a shelter. And so all of these 4 sites are at floating bus stops where we have the extra sidewalk width, where we've bumped the curb out into the right of way and really created that more generous, accessible path of travel on the sidewalk, as well as the waiting area for the bus stops. So we're really excited about this. In terms of next steps, we have gone through the competitive procurement process. Everybody always asks city staff, why do things take so long? Because we have really rigorous public procurement processes in the state of Massachusetts, rules that were put in place for legitimate and good reasons in the bad old days. But they can mean that you've got 3 to 6 months of lead time on something as quote unquote simple as buying a bus shelter. So we worked through the MBTA's process. We've done a competitive bid. We have a legitimate vendor and are now getting a contract signed with them. The expectation is that the earliest that they could deliver and install these bus shelters is springtime. So let's say April, May. We hope to have some shade in place going into the hotter months, and we're really, really excited about it. So thanks for your tolerance. I hope this has been helpful. Happy to answer questions on these last 2.
Super helpful. Just quick clarification on the Washington at Tufts bus stop. So that is where the MBTA just updated the bus stop, right?
That's correct. Alessandra,
So-
Washington Tufts headed westbound.
Amazing. It looks great. I'm so excited about it. But so our plan is to add a shelter to what they've already done.
Correct.
Okay.
So that floating bus stop, that sidewalk enhancement, crosswalk enhancement was sized to allow for a shelter to be placed. We did work hand in hand with the MBTA on that. So it's super exciting.
Awesome.
Is there still money for one more or, okay,
Yes, Brenda, we're hoping that we're gonna be able to actually deliver 5.
okay.
And if lightning strikes, we might get lucky and we will be able to get a 6th. We'll see.
Okay,
So
great.
we'll keep you on the loop.
Brad, I'm wondering if our one of our next topics will cover this, but I assume it covers the money here is really about infrastructure, not necessarily ongoing service, maintenance, snow clearing is on my mind.
Steve, that's a terrific question. Thanks for asking. So part of the memorandums of agreement and the contracts that we've signed with the MBTA's designated vendor is that MBTA will quote unquote own the shelters, as strange as that sounds. And what that means in terms of operations and maintenance is that if there are issues with, for example, vandalism, or there's a bad thunderstorm and a tree branch flies into a piece of plexiglass and breaks it, MBTA's vendor is responsible to fix that. But I also want to be very, very clear, MBTA is not expected to do snow clearance to the standards that we would want. So we continue to expect that our local forces will be responsible for snow clearance at these locations.
But Steve, are you asking, I just want to make sure we understood your question right. Are you asking if participatory budgeting funds can be used for ongoing services?
Well, yeah, that was part of it. I mean, obviously, like, where is the maintenance coming from and who's responsible for what? But then, yeah, I mean, I'm, curious about sort of how that money can be used. Obviously, where it's allocated now makes complete sense, but just going forward.
Steve, that's another great question because round 2 of participatory budgeting is currently underway. I sat down with the project manager for that effort just yesterday. And again, many of you may have actually put ideas onto the online map just over the last couple of months. So a new steering committee has been set up for round 2, and they will be beginning their meetings and their evaluation of options over the next couple of months. And we hope to have recommendations for round 2 in the springtime as well. So I'll make sure to capture that note, Steve, so that the staff at our finance department that's managing this effort can be super clear with everybody about whether operations and maintenance types of costs are eligible costs or whether this is just capital assets only. I don't know off the top of my head.
Any other questions? Okay, awesome. Thank you both so much. Super helpful. And looking forward to additional updates on Elm Street and whenever that happens and our visit from parking. I have a quick logistical question. Can you log into the meeting, Vitor, in case I have to give you the owl because my laptop may die. I think I want to actually move around our next agenda item because we can talk about the PTAC annual report in February as well. It's not an urgent thing. I would really like to discuss, have our discussion around enforcement and snow clearing, just because I think it'll set us up for priorities for the next year and help us determine some strategies. So there are two points to this agenda discussion. One is, enforcement has been a topic that we've explored through various perspectives on PTAC, especially in 2023, a little less in 2024, just because it was not our area of focus. But it has been voiced as a desire to focus on as a priority for 2025. And the thing that I would really love to determine with all of you is, enforcement is a really big topic and there's a lot of different perspectives on it on the committee. And I want to make sure that we're pursuing things that feel good to the majority of community members and that folks can kind of get on board with. So I don't think that we should have that conversation tonight. I think it probably merits more time and deliberate facilitated discussion. But what I am hoping to do tonight is to talk about a process for having that conversation. So, the goal would be to kind of come together in some capacity to set the topics that we want to explore, to kind of understand where the majority of people are coming from on the committee around enforcement. So some ideas that the officers came up with at our last mobility officer meeting, just to start like generating these ideas and getting a sense of where committee members are, is we could simply have a committee meeting, right? And just have the entire hour and a half devoted to talking about our stances on enforcement. I mean, this would be a pretty elegant way to do it, but it also might be a relatively high stakes environment because these meetings are recorded and members of the public are open to join. So, folks may not feel like they can speak as openly as they might want to. So benefits and drawbacks there. We could, that discussion could take place in a more facilitated format. We would have to think about like how to do that with open meeting law, but like, there are like facilitation techniques like think, pair, share, for example, that we might figure out how to bring into this meeting space. Beyond a meeting, we could send out a survey with some basic questions about like, which of these enforcement related topics are interesting to you? Do you have any concerns about pursuing enforcement? Do you feel, what is your stance generally on it? Whatever. And just send that out to folks to respond to. We could have individual conversations, like, each of the officers could like give every member of PTAC like a call and have a conversation with you based on like kind of a predetermined set of questions. Or, each of us could kind of talk within our buddy pairs, right? And have a conversation about enforcement with each other, with the people that we've been buddy paired with, and then kind of like report back to the committee on what we discovered within our pairs. Or something else that I did not say and have not thought of yet. But I'm just curious what would feel good to folks to start actually having this conversation so that we can start acting on a topic that we've been kind of circling around, I think, for a while now. Floor is open.
Alexander, just a little bit of history of this. I've been one of the people that's been on PTAC since it began, and we established a subcommittee for education and enforcement. We haven't had really a lot of people join us, unfortunately. And I see this as a hugely big topic, and in some respects, very difficult to tackle because there's so many branches of it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Ginny. Is there a mechanism for determining kind of how to start moving forward, like any of the ones that I just mentioned, that appeals to you?
I'm thinking that perhaps a small group of us could get together and initially decide what we might want to prioritize for this.
So kind of like an ad hoc.
Yeah,
meeting.
exactly. An ad hoc committee that would get together, decide what we want to prioritize, and perhaps come up with a plan for working within the community to get this done.
All right, that is another suggestion to add to the list of possibilities. Thank you so much, Ginny. I think that's very valuable.
I think a survey might be helpful just to gauge like where people's interests are clustered around and see if we have, a couple of clusters or areas that end up becoming the most popular, and that might be an easy way to figure out what we need to pursue next. Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of effort, obviously, in putting together the survey itself, but then hopefully, once we have the topics organized, then we could do small groups, or then we could, do buddy conversations, or that would just help us focus, I think.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Meredith. I agree with that. I think a survey is a great place to start, just to sort of focus the discussion. And like, I think that would give us, like, to the point you made, a sense of what the best approach will be. Because like maybe it'll come out that there's, a significant degree of consensus, and then we can have sort of a group conversation around that. Or maybe there will be sort of different sort of perspectives that could then, be more amenable to small group conversations. But I think just sort of getting that baseline degree of understanding is a great place to start.
Awesome. Any negative reactions to a survey? Anybody who's like, I will absolutely not fill out a survey and I do not want to do that? Okay, well, hearing none, I motion that we start with a survey. I'm very happy to draft it and have my fellow officers look at it just to make sure we're not missing anything on it, and send it out to folks. And then you know, as Brenda and Meredith both noted, that is not like mutually exclusive with having a smaller group of committee members get together and kind of parse through the results of the survey, and perhaps create a proposal for the rest of the committee to consider in terms of strategy. That was a long motion, but do I have a second for it?
This
I
is
second-
Jenny. I'll second it.
Okay.
Great, thank you all. All in favor, please say aye.
I,
All opposed? All right, fantastic. Thank you all so much. I'm excited to start working through that. The second discussion we wanted to have was on enforcement. And actually, Vitor, I think at this point, it might be useful if you take over the owl because I have 10 minutes on my battery remaining before we.
Can you
start
give
the
me
conversation.
speak items? Can you guys hear us? Okay, I think it's working.
I think you have to
Doesn't
change
exist.
your inputs, your audio and your video to the owl.
Yeah, okay.
You got it?
Mhm.
Oh, beautiful. And then just turn on your video.
There we go.
Oh, but it's just looking at us.
Oh, it's not the owl's video. Yeah, wait. There we go.
Hey, thank you, Vitor. Okay, so for our second part of the discussion, we wanted to talk about snow clearing. Vitor brought this up in our officer mobility meeting about concerns around how the last winter storm was handled, or I guess 2 winter storms ago, the really big one. And he has prepared a comment letter. And, you know, I think we can use this time to talk about snow clearing and our strategy and review the letter. I don't think we have any pressure to like send the letter necessarily. It could go back to a smaller group to work on, whatever. So, you know, I think there's flexibility with how we handle this agenda item, but I will turn it over to Vitor to present the letter for consideration.
Awesome. Thanks, Alessandra. So this letter is mostly a me letter. So the points that I was trying to get through on our officers meeting, or what I saw was broken from our December snowstorm, which was a little bit bigger than the one over the weekend. But to be fair, in my walk over here from Winter Hill to the library, I saw 5 houses that had ice on the ground on their sidewalks at varying levels of coverage. There was one that was fully covered, and there was one with just a few spots around. And we know how ice can be dangerous for people. So even on, I'd call it tiny snowfalls over the weekend, we still have this issue. And to be clear, and I think the letter talks a little bit about this, snow clearing is a public-private partnership between the city and landlords generally. And I do think the city is doing an okay to good job from the DPW's perspective of cleaning public roadways and sidewalks that are managed by the city. But the private part is very inconsistent and troublesome, at least in my view. So I laid out a few points that could be interesting to discuss. I think one of the main points is that on the previous storms, we saw ice on the ground on a good number of houses 7 days after the end of the precipitation. And that's, to me, is unacceptable. It's not something that a city on our size and resources should go through. And we should find a way to solve that component. And again, this is mostly the private component of the sidewalks. And how do we engage those participants to do what we think is good work, and And frankly, I think we need to define what good work means for sidewalk clearing. I think most people are confused about what they should do. So on the letter, I laid out about 7 points. The first one is to differentiate between snow and ice. It's perfectly fine for us to wait 6 hours to remove snow from a sidewalk, but I do think ice is a different game altogether, and it should never be there during or after the storm. So we should find a way to clearly regulate that ice component and communicate that to the private entities around us. We need more manpower to do inspections on sidewalks. There was an idea on the letter to have temporary workers working with the ISD department that performs these inspections throughout the city, and just have many more people after the storms visiting houses and evaluating their performance on clearing the snow. Education and outreach is a big part of this game. We need to let people know what they should be doing, who has the responsibility for what between tenants and landlords, and how much of the work should be done. Is 1 feet good enough? We have on the regulations that is 3 feet. Some people just cleared 1 feet. Some people do, they cleared most of the snow, but there's a thin layer that they leave in there. So, on all of those options, like what's the acceptable margin on any of these processes? Different storms, different regulations. I think in December we had a storm that was happening for a while, and the city didn't close, so everybody was out and about while the snowfall was happening, and I was out and about as well, and I could see the mess that was happening both on the roadway with cars not being able to go up, for instance, on Central Street and on Lower Street, because it was icing on the road, or just too much snow on the ground in the road. So, the basic system of the road clearing wasn't really working that well at the time, but also the sidewalks were completely flooded with snow. And if buses running, bus stops should be cleared as well, so people can get in and out of buses and so on in a safe manner. So figure out a way to do different regulations for different storms. One storm that, should be perfectly fine for us to, have an emergency and clear the snow only after, say 6 hours after the snowstorm finishes. But in other cases, there might be some type of frequent clearing of the sidewalk that is required by landowners to just sustain that in the fact that everybody is out and they're not really holding the fort at home. We thought about this idea of putting a target on, how long should it take to get the city back to 100% mobility, including sidewalks, bike paths, and cars. And I think it's a good metric to have just 24 hours. If the city is not cleared, we need to review our procedures and see if we can get to the better shape. The bus stops, like I said before, if buses are running, the stops must be cleared. So it's very simple, people need to go in and out, and they need to do it safely. They need to wait for the bus. So everything around that activity should be ready to go. And this is mostly on the fact that I think we all believe that riding a bus during a snowfall or during a storm is safer than driving. If you can make that choice, you should choose public transit. And it just has never been the priority for the clearing process to actually solve that part of the equation so that it entices people to choose taking the bus as opposed to driving around. And the final point is really just exploring partnerships. We know the city doesn't have, ever all the money that it would like to have. So it's really about making the efficient use of capital. If we can partner with any private entity that can do some of this work and can help us educate, can help us manage this process, we should try to find one and just try to get that process going. If not, we could create one, or, there are many ways to move that forward, but really, I think the headline here is that ISD and DPW do have their practices in place, and there might be a need for some higher manager type of professional that just manages the two departments plus the private space and how to get everybody in sync so we can cover every single square feet of sidewalk, bike lanes and roads for the city, and hopefully clear them in 24 hours, regardless of how big the snowstorm is. And just get people back to working and, doing their economic development in the best way they see fit. That was my rant. Again, this is just a me letter right now, but I'd really like the committee to take a look at it, see if it also represents your views, and if so, we can keep it moving forward and add your own opinions to the letter.
Thank you, Vitor. Super, super useful. I think it's probably most useful for this discussion to focus on kind of the points that Vitor described, like, just like, do you agree with them? Do you agree with the observations? Is this an approach that you would also like to advocate for to the city? Yeah.
One thing I would add is that I actually think some businesses do a poor job of clearing their sidewalks too. So it's not just, like homeowners and landlords and stuff. I can think of a couple of businesses that every time I'm like, oh God, I'm gonna avoid that side of the sidewalk when I walk by.
This is a hard kind of thing because I frankly think that the city should take over both public and private sidewalk clearing. I really do. Because let's face it, Somerville has a large elderly and disabled population, and those people may not be able to clear sidewalks. So the question I have is, would people be willing to pay either a fee or additional property taxes to have the city take over and manage this problem?
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. I mean, as we've talked about before, there is the teen sidewalk snow clearing program where folks, older folks and folks with disabilities can, get teens to shovel their sidewalks for them. But I mean, to your point, like I have no idea like how well used that program is, for example, or how well publicized it is, or to what populations it's publicized. So certainly agree that there could be a huge gap there.
And the other question is, for people who don't know about it, how do they apply? So
exactly.
that someone can take care of their sidewalk area and even their driveways if they have them.
Absolutely. Barbara.
First of all, I would support the idea of the city taking it over, and whether it's on a fee, I would personally pay a higher property tax for that. It's treacherous. The ice situation is really frightful, and as an old lady, I find it alarming and scary. And I can't imagine what it's like with limited mobility or other physical issues. If you can't see it or if you can't get around it. And I know this is my song about everything, but I feel as if at some point either the city has to take it over or there has to be some kind of enforcement, because residential neighborhoods in particular are completely uneven.
I mean, frankly, when you can't see the ice, that's dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, when I had a guide dog, he would lead me around it as best he could, but having to use a cane, no.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara. Steve.
Yeah, just a note that I'm really drawn to the idea of having a North Star, like the 24-hour time frame to 100% mobility. It's a complicated issue, and we're never going to get that pure 100%. But to have a North Star that everyone's aiming at with the things that we can impact, both privately and citywide, I just think it's powerful, because right now, just the idea of clear your sidewalk isn't enough to motivate. What does that mean? We need more specificity about what that means and what we're collectively trying to do, right?
Thanks, Steve. Preston?
I agree with some of that on the visibility, because I think there's a lot where people don't even necessarily know what their requirements or obligations are for snow clearing. I have in multiple residences throughout Massachusetts had problems with landlords that don't understand that they cannot, unless the doors are set up in a very specific way, legally have their tenants be required to shovel. Doesn't mean I don't end up being the one shoveling, but I think that's a lot of the residences in Somerville are renters, and there's a lot of landlords that just don't care. So if you get someone halfway shoveling, it's somebody that's not necessarily responsible for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Other thoughts on just snow clearing generally, the points in this letter in particular, or specific things that you would want to add to advocacy? Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
So thanks, group. This is a good discussion, and Lily and I will continue to bring back information and reports to mobility staff as well as others, including DPW. I did speak with Eric, our Director of Operations at DPW this afternoon. He joined you all in December,
I think
November, and described to the committee the standard operating procedures that our DPW has tried to adhere to, the standard operating procedures that our Inspectional Services Division has tried to adhere to. And so it's clear to me, based on this conversation, based on the draft letter that you've prepared, Vitor, that we can do better in terms of connecting the dots with our established standard operating procedures and policies and our performance. But we can also do a better job of connecting the dots between our standard operating procedures and people's awareness of them. I think that's a real value of this committee, is the visibility side of things, to make sure that we're sharing things like Eric's slides. I've got them here up on my screen, and if I could respectfully suggest, as you all continue to refine this draft letter and think about the posture that this committee wants to take, please ensure that there's a component of grading us to the commitments that we have already made. And don't simply focus on grading us to an aspiration that we have not yet committed to or staffed up or allocated resources to achieve. Please don't get me wrong. Somerville wants to and deserves to be Montreal. We want to and deserve to be Minneapolis. These are the best snow operation cities on the continent. And when we're at NACTO sessions, we are talking with them about their SOPs, their geography. We want to get there. There has been chronic underinvestment in our human resources, in our equipment, and it's not unique to DPW. It's also present in ISD. It's present in our communications teams as we try to get the word out for new residents, for new property owners. Here are your rights. Here are your responsibilities. So please remember that this is that it didn't happen in Montreal or Minneapolis overnight. It took years, if not decades, of hard conversations like this one, of righteously and understandably frustrated comment letters from individuals as well as official advisory committees like you. So we will relay this information back, but I just would ask respectfully that you keep that kind of twin objective in mind. The SOPs that Eric has already committed and identified, as well as where we want to go in the future. The last thing I'll note is a slightly happier note. As you all know, you read the newspapers. After much hard work from lots and lots of folks acting in good faith, we do have collective bargaining resolutions for the largest municipal employees, collective bargaining units in Somerville. People like Eric are working on that in addition to staying up all night fighting snow. People like the mayor, like the city council, like the CFO are working on these issues in addition to everything else that they are doing. And so I think there's a cause for applause to all the folks on the labor side, on the management side, in the community, in the council, and the mayor herself to resolve these issues and to try to create an environment where we have the person power, where we have the ability to attract and retain hardworking, talented people who know the local context. When Eric and Jill and their team are trying to scramble like they were in the December forecast, the snow event that outperformed the forecasts, that puts them in a position to fail. That puts you all and our end users in a position to fail, and nobody wants that. Everybody's working in good faith, but we are dealing with decades of chronic underinvestment. So please continue to help us build and don't just tear down. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I still think we need a strong working relationship with the city, not an adversarial one.
Yes.
Thank you, Ginny.
Go ahead, Brad.
As input to our discussions, could there be a summary of what you folks already know about the successes in Montreal and Minneapolis and other cities like that? You know, how did they get there and what was the outcome? You know, how much enforcement versus how much city doing everything? You know, I imagine there's no place where the city does everything, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I love that idea, Rob. And usually, for example, NACDO will do a good job of publishing slide decks and webinar content on those types of topics. And then there are also even affiliated professional associations. So for example, this is going to sound wacky. There is something called the Winter Cycling Congress, which is a specialty professional development and community advocacy annual conference that occurs in places like Calgary, places like Minneapolis. And so we know that there are folks in the Metro Boston region who are super plugged into that space. So yes, I will capture that note. We'll try to find some resources that you all can use to build that library.
Fantastic. And I'll just say one thing, which is that the path clearing, I'm gonna add that in the positive. You know, I love it. The path is just usually done so well and so quickly.
Thank you. That's been a new one and a challenge, and some might argue a moving goalpost for our overstretched DPW teams. So we'll be sure to convey that gratitude as well. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, real quick, I just wanted to ask about one specific point in the letter, the draft letter. The paragraph that says different storms, different regulations. Just that seemed to me like it maybe is going a little, it's setting a standard that might be hard to enforce. And I liked the emphasis on enforcement elsewhere in the letter on sort of increasing enforcement resources. But that paragraph where it's talking about constant snow clearing during extended storms just seemed like something that it'd be hard to have that standard be in the law and have people be held to it with enforcement. So just wanted to ask maybe Vitor what you're thinking there and if you might consider an edit to that part.
Yeah, for sure. We can definitely remove it from the letter if we want to send it forward. That was just an idea, and because December was such a different storm, I think, that it felt important to just have some priority for the sidewalks while the storm is happening, if the city is open. So there are a lot of ifs that to deal with, and I'm not really sure how different regulations will get exposed to the population. So it is really hard, and we can just leave it for later for sure.
Brad, let me ask you this. So thinking about kind of Ginny's point of, we want to maintain good relationships with all of our the city staff members who are generous enough to share their time with us and serve our community. But also know that, there are issues on the operations side, but also on the resourcing side. So I'm just curious who you think it would be useful to get this letter in front of at the city.
Well, you are an official advisory committee of the city of Somerville. And so I think that elected officials is one obvious lens, right? But senior management is another really, really important one. So not limited to Commissioner Jill Lathan, who's amazing at our DPW, Director Nick Antanovica, who runs our Inspectional Services Division. Those kind of senior managers and executive folks, I think, are logical, visible copy type folks on any communication from an official city advisory committee. Please don't limit it to the electeds, even though they're critical, right? I'm trying to think if there are others in our finance department, our communications department. It might make some sense to be a little bit more expansive.
Okay.
But we're talking about department head level folks. Remember, I'm a middle manager. Eric is a middle manager. He's a senior manager in a much larger department. But ultimately, you can and should continue to work through department heads who manage groups of 50 and groups of 100, not groups of 5 and 10.
Okay, helpful. Thank you. In terms of next steps on this, You know, it sounds like we have a number of suggested edits and additions to the letter. There are a few things that we could do. One is we could bring this letter back for discussion in February, and Vitor, if he is willing, could organize maybe a design review subcommittee to review the letter and work on it, which anybody would be able to join. If folks feel comfortable with just edits being made to the letter, based on our discussion tonight, you know, we could vote to send the letter pending edits, but we would not get another, we would not make another opportunity for ourselves to review the letter. Or we could, you know, kind of hold on this and decide to revisit it at a future point whenever people are interested. What feels good to folks in regards to moving forward with this? Any preferences?
Guess I'll just throw out a weak preference for the first option you described, sort of the taking it into a smaller committee, just so we have the opportunity to make sure we really digest Brad's feedback about making sure that we're evaluating to the standards that, you know, have been sort of committed to, as opposed to the aspirational ones.
Thanks, Meredith. Barbara, did you unmute to say something?
I did. I agree with what Meredith said, and I think we're having some snow come this weekend, so maybe we'll have more anecdotal experience, hopefully more positive, but I agree.
Is that something that you're willing? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ted, please.
Oh, sorry. This is Ty. I was going to just say I also agree. And just to Meredith's point, I think it could, some of the things in the letter are proposing changes in regulations, and some are, you know, so actually more aspirational in that sense, and some are proposing sort of doing things maybe better within the framework that's already there. So maybe those could be broken out a little bit. But I would like to include both of those things in the letter.
Thank you, Ted. Does a meeting sound like something you'd be willing to organize? Sure. Awesome. Then I don't think we have to vote on that. I think we can just do that. Awesome. So then it's obviously 3 minutes past. So we'll get to our annual report review next month, which I think will actually work better because that will give me an opportunity to incorporate mobility's KPIs into the letter from the chair that I usually write at the beginning of the report. But in the meantime, you all have access to it, so please review it and share your thoughts. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Thank you to our city staff for their wonderful presentation, and see everybody in February.
And Alessandra, extra special thank you and congratulations to all of you, especially those of you like Ginny, Vitor, and others who have served for 5 years. I remember when the Pedestrian and Transit Advisory Committee was simply a gleam in advocates' eyes, including city councilors, including the mayor when she was a councilor. Like this doesn't just happen. Committees are often set up and then run out of steam, and it really reflects your hard work and volunteerism. So you just can't let a meeting go by, especially an auspicious occasion like this one. Saying congratulations and thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks.
I think it's Ginny, Vitor, and Ted, right? Has anybody else been here the whole time?
And Zach.
And Zach.
And Zach. Zach was the president, and I was the vice chair.
Yes, that's right. Awesome. Yes, thank you all so much for your service. We look forward to 5 more years.
That'd be great.
All right, bye everybody. Have a great night.
Take care.
Good night.
Thank you.